Hi guys, Ash from Tech Talk. So today we're just going to do a bit more of a review of the Moto G9 Plus's camera. As I've said in previous videos, I'm not a camera expert, but I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the hardware, show you a few of the photos and talk about what I think of the photos, and then obviously you guys can leave comments on what you think. So let's get to it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring up a few photos taken from the Moto G9 Plus. I've also taken the exact same photos with the Oppo A72, which is in a very similar price range. So we'll just sort of compare the two as well. So what we've got here is these nice lovebirds on the Moto G9 Plus. So on here, detail's really good. Colour is a bit more saturated than what the actual colour is outside, and it does seem a little bit dark because obviously outside it's very bright, so it seems to have come out relatively dark. Obviously this is stuff that you can adjust in Lightroom or something. You can whack the brightness up or exposure up or whatever just to brighten it up a little bit, but as it turns out, with the lovebirds being the main subject here, it's captured them pretty well and in some nice detail. I also took the same photo, switched to the ultra wide. Again, detail's okay. I mean, obviously going from a 16 pixel binned megapixel image to an 8 megapixel image on the ultra wide with a smaller aperture, the detail is not as good. The color temperature is very different as well. It's less saturated and the color temperature is quite cool. It's kind of like a bluey hint to it. So, but I think this is obviously expected with most ultra wide lenses anyway. So if we go on to the next photo of these green plants, again, detail's pretty good. The colour is actually more true to life. It doesn't seem to have come out that saturated on this one. Although the AI did pick up it was green plants, and AI modes with plants tend to boost the saturation, which it doesn't seem to have done too much here, which is pretty good. I also took the same with the macro lens on this one. So it's kind of not decided which part it wants to focus on. So on this leaf here, it's sharp all around this bit here, and then here it started to blur a little bit. I actually did try and select it so it could focus on that leaf as the main part, but it's kind of done that one and a bit over here as well and blurred out the rest. I mean, the edge detection is pretty good, especially on, you know, up here and round there. It's pretty good, but it didn't decide that it wanted to keep this whole leaf sharp, which is a bit unfortunate, but nevertheless it's pretty good. And then the last one I took was of this weird butterfly bug thing. Detail's good. The separation of the subject is generally pretty decent. The only time it struggled was with the three back legs here. It didn't capture those as part of the main subject, so it tried to blur those out. And then the stringy metal hanging bit, it tried to blur that bit out as well, which is a bit unfortunate. But in terms of everything else, it's kept the weird bug thing. I've got no idea what it is. It's kept it very sharp. Colour is true to life. It's not oversaturated this either. So I'm quite happy with that one. Obviously minus the blurring errors that it tried to do. Okay, so if we just quickly switch to the Oppo A72 on here, quite similar in terms of the results here. It seems to be a bit more saturated than the G9 Plus, but as far as that, it looks very similar. I mean, the detail's good, a small amount of blur on the background there, so there's not really that many complaints here. I mean, personally, you know, if I was editing this photo, I would probably just tone down the saturation a little bit. If we flip to the ultra wide on here, again, it's not going to be as good a quality as the main lens. It hasn't got the same sort of cool color temperature to this one, and it does look a bit more saturated than the one on the G9 Plus. So there we go. So yeah, not bad. Can't really complain too much about it, especially at the price range. Green plant here, again, this picked up that it was a plant on the Oppo A72's AI mode. The detail is really good on that, and the colour is not too oversaturated given the AI mode. It didn't tend to boost it that much, so what it did, I don't really know, to be honest. But yeah, it did a pretty good job at collecting lots of detail. So on this one, did a slightly better job of keeping this particular leaf here in focus and sharp. You can kind of see a little bit as it gets towards the end of this that it's trying to blur that one out a little bit, but it's not as much as the G9 Plus. And then all of this over here is more blurred. So the G9 Plus had kind of this area here sharp, and then this was quite significantly blurred out, whereas on the A72 it's kind of a smaller area that's kept sharp, this bit here and sort of up there. It's trying to blur that bit out a little bit more, and you know, it's blurred that bit out a little bit. So yeah, it's different to the G9 Plus, I'll definitely put it that way. The subject separation again is pretty decent, especially as you can see down on this bit. There's a clear definition between the leaf here and then the background there. So yeah, not too bad. And then if we go lastly onto the weird bug thing. So on here, the same problem with the A72 that was with the G9 Plus. It's struggled with the back legs there, trying to blur them out. However, it did keep the entire hanging bit as part of the main subject, which was really good and better than the G9 Plus. Obviously everything else is decent. Again, the colour of the bug is true to life. Is it a little bit more saturated than the G9 Plus? Let's just go back onto the G9 Plus one. Yeah, it's a little bit more saturated than the G9 Plus, but there's not really a lot in it, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, that one was really good. And then I've done just a quick comparison of the two, so you can just have a better look at the two. So on here, G9 Plus is probably caught more detail. Oppo A72 is a bit more green, a bit lighter, and then these two here, the Oppo A72 is slightly more saturated than the G9 Plus, and has caught all of that in focus as well, which I think is good. And then on this one here, both the standard lenses there, the Oppo A72 again is more saturated, but if you were to zoom in, you'll have probably a bit more detail on the G9 Plus. But then the G9 Plus has a 64 megapixel main lens which pixel bins to 16, whereas the Oppo A72 has a 48 megapixel camera pixel binned to 12. So naturally you will get more detail on the main lens of the Motorola Moto G9 Plus. And then on the wide angle lenses, both 8 megapixels, and you can obviously see that on the Moto G9 Plus it is cooler. I actually prefer the colour temperature of the Oppo A72. That is more true to what it is actually outside rather than the cooler temperature of the G9 Plus. Okay, so that's the G9 Plus camera compared to the A72. They're both very similar in price. Cameras are quite similar. Obviously with the G9 Plus you get the 64 megapixel main lens as opposed to 48 on the Oppo A72. Now, getting a budget phone these days is, I think, quite difficult because they're all very similar. They've all got the same 48 megapixel quad cameras. They've all got the same 6.5 inch screen with the punch hole camera in the top left hand corner. So it's difficult. It's like, you know, do you pick an Oppo A72? Do you pick a Realme 7? Do you pick a Redmi Note 10 or Redmi Note 9? Because all of those phones have a 48 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide, you know, a 2 megapixel macro camera, which to be honest nobody cares about, and then the 2 megapixel depth sensor. So which one do you pick? Obviously the Redmi Note 10 is newer, but that's beside the point. So that's where the Moto G9 Plus stands out a little bit, because it's got a 64 megapixel main lens, so you're going to get slightly higher resolution photos. It's got a 6.8 inch screen as opposed to 6.5 inch on those others. It's got a Snapdragon 730G and an 8, which is 8 nanometers, so it's going to be slightly more power efficient than those others, which are all 12 nanometer or 11. So it stands out in a few ways. I mean, it's got the same 5000 milliamp battery, so battery life is going to be very, very similar. So do you buy the Moto G9 Plus? To be honest, yeah, I mean, to me there's no reason why you shouldn't. It's a really good phone. Photos are good, obviously are to be expected at this price point. They're nothing special. So yeah, I mean, if you want to go out and buy the G9 Plus, do it. There's no reason not to. So thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time. If anyone's got a G9 Plus and you want to leave some comments down below on your experience with it, then yeah, that would be great. And also subscribe and like my channel. It will really help out, and I'll see you next time.